Our scripture this morning is Matthew 1:18 through 25. And this is from the New Living Testament. This is how Jesus the Messiah was born. His mother Mary was engaged to be married to Joseph. But before the marriage took place, while she was still a virgin, she became pregnant through the power of the Holy Spirit. Joseph, her fiancé, was a good man and did not want to disgrace her publicly, so he decided to break the engagement quietly. As he considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream. "Joseph, son of David," the angel said, "do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child within her was conceived by the Holy Spirit. And she will soon have a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." All of this occurred to fulfill the Lord's message through his prophet. "Look, the virgin will conceive a child. She will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel," which means God is with us. When Joseph woke up, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded and took Mary as his wife. But he did not have sexual relations with her until her son was born, and Joseph named him Jesus.
Morning. When I teach my Bigger Values class, I teach about integrity for a whole week. And I like to share the story of my recovery because it shows people, gets people to think about what it's like to lose the respect of everyone in your life and have to earn that back. And the frustration that can come with having turned a corner and being on the right path and still have people question your motives and still have people be suspicious about what you're trying to do. And if you've ever had an experience like that, I think for a second there you have a little bit of a taste of what it'd be like to walk in the sandals of Joseph. You know, in the ancient world, we think in terms of importance, we think about money and symbols of status and things like that. But in the ancient world, what was more important than all of that was your reputation. That was the most important currency that was available for people. If you died penniless but had a good reputation, that would be a wonderful thing in some people's eyes. I mean, money was important, but what's more important was the respect of your community. And most people didn't live that much farther from the place that they were born and lived in a tight-knit community. And so this is something that few of us really understand in our transient time. I mean, I've moved thousands of miles away from my family, so what they think doesn't affect me all that much. But not a lot is mentioned about Joseph in the Bible, and this week we're going to look at Joseph and kind of understanding his perspective, and next week we're going to look at Mary. But this is one of those rare texts that kind of give us a window into who Joseph really was and what he stood for. And when confronted with a situation where he would be blamed for doing something wrong that he didn't do, Joseph, just like his namesake, Joseph in the Old Testament, he just humbly accepted what God's will was for him, even though it meant that his reputation would be shattered. You know, hiding a baby, much less a pregnancy, in a small, close-knit village would be something that would be really impossible for people to do. And I think in our culture, we like anonymity. We like to keep people at a distance and not have them know what's going on in our lives. But I've lived in a small town, about a third the size of this town, and even smaller than that. And I know that people watch what you do. People talk about what you have done. And people aren't going to be fooled. You know, you're not going to just close your door and forget that you know your neighbors when something happens like pregnancy. That's just not how the world works. So even though we've made a joke almost out of marriage in our culture and society, and embrace that kind of anonymity that no one could tell me what's going on in my life if I'm struggling in my marriage or something like that, that's not how Joseph would have thought about it. And public disgrace is not an easy thing to bear. And living in the pressures of a tight community for the rest of your life is something that most of us don't really have a box for. I saw this marriage kind of meme on Facebook, and it was talking about the perspectives and how they've changed on marriage. They had an elderly couple on the picture, and underneath it said something powerful. It said something like, we come from a generation where you don't just throw things away when they're broken, but you fix them. And I think that meme really illustrates how much marriage has changed in our view of it. It's not really taboo to get a divorce today because it happens so commonly that it's just accepted. You know, people don't want to spend their lives in a bad marriage, and I can understand that. But I think something else has been lost beyond just that. I think people are unwilling to sacrifice sometimes in the ways that would bring about a good marriage. Our whole society has changed that much. But in Joseph's day, things were a lot different. And the model of the family wasn't a nuclear family where there's just a mom and a dad and some kids, but it was a patriarchal family. Everybody belonged to a greater family, and the oldest male would be the one who was really calling the shots. And this older member of the family, the respect of that person would be hindered by the actions of anybody that was there. And so when Joseph's reputation was on the line, it wasn't just Joseph's reputation that was on the line, it was the reputation of his whole family. And Joseph, his parents probably were the ones that chose his bride. And so it would be reflective of both of their families making poor decisions. And so it was just a lot different. Mary was probably a teenager, Joseph was probably in his late 20s or early 30s, and that's pretty taboo today. But that's just how marriage was. Even 150 years ago, that's how marriage was, because people needed large families to grow lots of crops and things. They needed to have kind of an army of workers to farm the land by hand. And so it made sense for an older man to marry a younger girl, because an older man could better take care of his wife, and a younger wife was more likely to be able to have the most amount of children, many of which would not survive. And then that's just how the world worked. And I think it's easy for us to judge different times and cultures by our standards and think that we, in our aloof place in history, have learned so much more than they have. But when we think about marriage, we think about two people falling in love before they get married, not after. But if you just look at how our culture has changed and how we've kind of made love this all-consuming thing that you would make or break your relationship based on, and forgetting most any other factors, and you look at the statistics where 50% of marriages fail, you know, maybe we should be a little bit more humble about how we think about that. I think chemistry is an important thing, but you know, arranged marriages, things like that, having somebody who's kind of objective, who could pick out your spouse for you, you know, instead of just you jumping into marriage with the first pretty girl that comes along or whatever, can be something that's very important. And so we need more, I think, in our day than just love to make a marriage work. We need true commitment. Lots of people find their wives or husbands on the internet today, and that seems kind of a weird thing to me. I'm from the generation where that would just be, that's just creepy, you know? You met them on the internet? Oh my gosh. But that's our culture's version of something very similar. When you take a computer test and it tries to match you with somebody else, that's pretty much our modern take on an arranged marriage. It's the same thing, kind of pulling ourselves and our feelings out of it so we can try to find something that has a higher chance of working. And so think about that. I mean, I wouldn't trust my parents to choose a mate for me, because that would be, I mean, that's just scary. But I mean, think about it. Joseph's parents would have chosen somebody that they thought would be good for him. They would know him. They would try to find a girl from a good family. That's pretty much all that they could really do. Mary's parents would try to find somebody that they were pretty certain could provide for their family and take care of their daughter and provide a happy place for the grandchildren to grow up. And they probably didn't know each other that well, because people didn't let young couples be together and be alone like they do in our time. And this thing called betrothal is a pretty rigid custom. It's a lot different than just being engaged like they're in our time. If someone was betrothed and the other person died, then they would be widowed. That's how serious it was. And if both partners lived, it could only be ended in divorce. And this is why, even though Joseph wasn't technically married to her yet, he had to divorce her quietly. And so in marriage in the ancient world, too, was more than just this nuclear family thing. You were joining two families together. You were actually inviting somebody into your clan to be a part of that. So Joseph and Mary had gone through this process together, and they were still waiting to be married, and their families were looking to this great day of celebration, and then God just threw this big monkey wrench right into the middle of it. The Bible says that Joseph was a righteous man, and I think one of the ways that we get to see that, because we don't really get to see him too much in the Bible, is his mercy. And Joseph was probably very upset with Mary, thinking that she had committed a betrayal that was going to mark his life forever. And emotionally, I think that'd be just as much as affecting him as getting punched in the stomach or stabbed in the heart. And so Joseph wasn't just willing to forgive and forget probably and have warm, fuzzy feelings about Mary after this. I mean, he could have had her stoned to death if he decided to. He could have just taken all the money back that he had given her family to offset the cost of her leaving her family and joining his. And this meant that he had taken all that money that he and his family had saved to get married and had just let it go. Just let it go for somebody else. And this meant that he might not be able to marry anybody else for a couple of years until he could save up that money. So this was a pretty serious deal, a pretty serious thing that Joseph had done. If someone gets an unwanted pregnancy in our day, there are all kinds of options for them. All kinds of options that stop the natural result of just having a baby and taking care of it for the rest of your life. Our culture turns a blind eye for this sort of thing, but in Joseph's day, that was just not an option. The Roman law demanded that if he found out that his wife had had an affair on him and he didn't cheat on her, that would be considered pandering. Something that you recognize from pimping and pandering. Somebody who's taking advantage of their wife and using them for prostitution. And so this is Joseph's reputation that was at stake here. Either if people found out that he didn't do that, that it wasn't really his child, he would be thought of as doing that. If he claimed the child as his own, he was saying that he had broken his promise to both of their families. And that would show that they had made a poor choice in choosing this mate for him, and he had brought shame to his family. So Joseph's obedience to God was going to cost him probably the most valuable thing that he possessed. And so as the angel told him that this was going to be his fate, it didn't spare Joseph public disgrace. And so what a rocky way to start out a marriage, completely alienated by your family and your friends and your whole community. And what a rough way to start out a childhood, being seen by a whole village as an illegitimate child. It's pretty common in our day for this sort of thing to happen. I was an illegitimate child and had that label when I was a kid. You know, for the king of the universe to come down and choose to have a life that was sort of like mine or something really helps me understand that Jesus really wanted to identify with all people. He wanted to identify with the broken and the poor and the least and the lost and the last. And so this shows us more than just Joseph's mercy. It shows us God's mercy to us. You know, have you ever followed God when it looked really bad? When obedience looked like disobedience and people would be really angry with you and baffled by your choices? Joseph made this choice to do what God had asked of him. And even as the only person who would ever believe him would be Mary. So it's almost like Joseph was framed by God, if you really think about it. And it's almost like the angel was saying, your life's going to be really hard for you for decades here. And the angel, though, points to this prophecy of Isaiah and confirms that Joseph would be having God's Messiah raised in his household. And I think the doctrine of the virgin birth here is something that is really important, but it's important for different ways than most people think about it. And I just want to say, just so you know, that the Immaculate Conception is not the virgin birth. That's not the same thing. The Immaculate Conception is actually a Catholic belief about Mary having a virgin birth. The virgin birth is the virgin birth of Jesus. And so as Protestants, we believe in the virgin birth of Jesus, but we don't believe in the Immaculate Conception of Mary. And I think there's a lot of debate about whether Isaiah meant that it was actually going to be a virgin birth or not. There's a lot of different scholars who argue and debate about these things. But this isn't just something that hangs in the balance of a couple of obscure Hebrew or Greek words. It's something that is pretty clear in the text. It's something that they use whole sentences to make sure that people understand. Some people think that Matthew was playing kind of fast and loose with the text here, but I would encourage you that this isn't something that's really up for debate. I mean, it's something that was true. Matthew and Luke both make clear references to Jesus' birth being a non-sexual kind of birth, about being something that was miraculous. And I think it's really easy to be skeptical in our time about claims like that. People emphasize that this is how God did it for kind of an agenda in our time. Most people think of that why it's a big deal is because it proves that Jesus was divine, or it proves that Jesus lived a sinless life. And I think both of those ways of thinking about it actually miss something really important and profound about the incarnation. It's valuable not because it proves Jesus was sinless. It's a miracle. The incarnation is the ultimate miracle of miracles. It's a mystery. And I think there are problems with both of these ways of thinking that become apparent if you just sit and think about it for a second. I mean, logically, in order for Christ's sinlessness to come from his virgin birth, it would have to come because Mary had a sin nature, and so that's why you have things like the early church believing that Mary had a virgin birth. It would just go on and on and on forever. And this is not really proof of Jesus' sinlessness either, because Jesus would be, if Matthew was really trying to prove that, he wouldn't put these 5 really scandalous women in his genealogy. I'd love to go through sometime the series of all those different women, and it's rare that he would even include women, but the women that he included were all people who would, faithful to God in certain ways, but very scandalous, very people like Tamar, who had incest, people like Rahab the prostitute is in Matthew's genealogy. So this is not an intent to show that Jesus comes from this great line of completely purebred, wonderful Jewish blood. And so Christ's sinlessness doesn't come from his humanity, it comes from his divinity. He comes as the new Adam. He comes innocent as Adam was. And what would sanctify his body more than just the indwelling of God, the fullness of the second person of the Trinity, who was sinless long before the incarnation, and by whom we know the difference between sin and righteousness. And Jesus came not as a half God, half human, like a Greek demigod, but fully God and fully human. And this was a radical departure from what people would have understood or thought about at the time. Christ is the new Adam that Paul writes about in 1 Corinthians 15. And he fulfills a prophecy in Genesis 3:15, where the seed of the woman comes to the earth. I want to read and explore that in a second here. But Jesus comes to reverse the curse of Adam. And Genesis 3:14-15 says, "Then the Lord said to the serpent, because you have done this, you are cursed more than any livestock and more than any wild animal. You will move on your belly and eat dust all the days of your life. And I'll put hostility between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. And he will strike your head, and you will strike his heel." And so Jesus is the seed of the woman. That's why Joseph was excluded. It makes perfect sense that Jesus' humanity would come from his mother's side. And lots of people in the Old Testament had special births. Isaac had a special birth. Samuel had a special birth. And the special birth was a sign. And that's what Isaiah was saying. It's a sign. It's a big flag to say this person is special. Pay attention to them. And the virgin birth points to the incarnation, just like the empty tomb points to the resurrection. It's something that shows us the truth in a powerful way, but it's not something God could have done it a different way. It chose not to. And so the virgin birth points to the very identity of Jesus as the one who would come and save the world. Jesus' name means the Lord saves. I think it's fitting that it would point to Jesus' coming on this all-out rescue mission from God to seek and save the world. Jesus' identity, he would be Emmanuel. He would be the God who is with us. Not only did God become fully human and a person, he came and dwelt among us. He came to be with us. And so his name tells us his purpose, and his nickname tells us his identity. And I don't think Joseph or Mary could have understood all this. This is obviously based on thousands of years of theological reflection and understanding. They wouldn't have been understood all these things perfectly. Parenting is hard enough without angelic messengers and prophecies and scandalous plans of God to ruin a whole couple's reputation. But rather than some sanitized tale of heroism like you see in the Iliad or something like that, rather than coming like a demigod in ancient Greece or like some kind of superhero like Superman, Jesus was fully human. So we find God taking the form of the underdog, taking the form of the anti-hero, coming as a small baby, growing inside a woman who was a pregnant teenager in a backwater town. And so this Christmas, as you ponder the incarnation, think about that. Not only did God become fully human, he experienced the same sort of brokenness and alienation that many of us do. Jesus could have picked any parents he wanted. He could have lived in a palace. He could have had rich people take care of him, and he would have deserved every bit of that. In fact, he would have deserved far more. But he chose to come to Cheapside. He came to live among people who would reject him, and from the very beginning. And so he put himself through the same sorts of experiences that people have as an illegitimate child. He fled as an exile, fleeing a genocide. This is the story of God coming to the earth. A child who came to earth and went to a bad neighborhood, a place called Nazareth, a place that people in the Bible question, could anything good come from there? So the story demonstrates not only Joseph's mercy, but God's mercy. And sometimes following God's will put us at odds with the world's judgments. It might cost us our friends and our family's respect. It might make people misunderstand and question our motives. I don't think that being a Christian is easy. And so if we find ourselves looked down on for our faithfulness, we have a lot of good company. People like Joseph and Mary. If we find ourselves broken by the ways of the world, we can trust that God is with us. He didn't spare himself these same sorts of frustrations and same sorts of brokenness, same sorts of rejection that we experience. And he made sure that he would be able to identify with the poor and the marginalized. And so the love of God is a love that breaks all the rules, breaks all our intellectual rules, it breaks through into the sinful world that Jesus came to save. It was a luxurious love. It was also a very scandalous love. And so our salvation comes by way of the incarnation. It's wrapped up in this mystery of Jesus being fully God and fully human. Fully God because only God can take away our sins. And fully human because a new Adam was needed to reverse the curse that the first Adam had brought upon us. And for all of this, we can thank God. But we can also admire the faithfulness of people like Joseph and Mary, a couple that God chose to use to bless the whole world. And so as you go into this time of open worship, I just want you to think about the story here. Think about the perspective, the difficulty of these people. Think about why God would put them in such a rough situation. To shape his life, to deliberately choose a life that would be hard. If you were standing in Joseph or Mary's shoes, would you have the courage to follow their example, to be faithful in that? To follow God when the whole world doesn't understand. So just think about that story. Think about where you see yourself